Welcome to the Real Those Show, the podcast with a purpose for the people. I'm your host, Christopher Keith, and we're brought to you by Queso. What? Them gourmet, handcrafted, handmade, cooked to order quesadillas that you love so much. If you had a chance to get to them, if not, you have to make your way there. So, welcome back. This is an episode of I Got a Story to Tell. I got a story to tell, and this is a story that kind of fell into my lap because I kind of forgotten all about it. But things happen and memories, from your childhood kind of, kind of take you back some places. So anyway, this is a story to tell about the time an older man tried to groom me sexually. So, to the best of my recollection, I'm thinking I'm about 12 or 13 years old. And I was hanging out with my dad because at that time I was living in South Bend, Indiana, and then I would come to go to like Pennsylvania, go to Pittsburgh for a few weeks, and then I'd go to St. Louis sometimes before I go back to Indiana. So I was hanging out with my dad, it was like the last part of summer before I was going to go back to South Bend. And he had a date that night. So, he had to do something with me. So, so I guess my cousins were not available because that's where I normally spend most of my evenings over my cousin's house on 2020 Trinley Avenue in East St. Louis, Illinois. So some must have been going on. I don't know. But anyway, I ended up, he's had to drop me off at one of his boys' house. So he takes me over to this guy's house, and I'm not going to tell you, I know the guy's name, I know his full government, but I'm not going to say his full government. And the reason why is because he he has two daughters. Now, mind you, I haven't seen these two daughters since I was that age, but as far as I'm concerned, if they're still living, they don't deserve to have this out there unless they wanted to have it out there. So I'm not going to put his real name out there. But I will tell you what his nickname was, and his nickname was Prophet. Prophet, as in, I guess he was a guy who saw himself as a prophesier, if you will, in church. Uh, and so, but that was my father's nickname for me. Hey, Prophet, how you doing? Prophet, what's going on, Prophet? So so like I said, I remember the dude, by that name, tall, brown skin. He had braids. And this is like, late 70s, early 80s. So it wasn't a lot of dudes having braids, but he was kind of his own kind of cat like that, but like I said, he had his braids and stuff. And I had been over his house a couple times before. And I remember like that there was this kind of strange aura about his crib. So, like I said, he called himself a prophet or whatever, and he had these robes. So he always had these real nice preacher robes, and he would have them like in the cleaner's bag, hanging up. But then the other thing that was weird was in his living room, he'd have these like fish bowls, and these fish bowls would have this clear liquid in them and money, like cash money. So I mean like $50 bills, $20 bills, a few $100 bills, like they would just be in these bowls, and there was a lot of candles all over the place. So, he kind of had this mystic thing going. Um, with these candles and this, I don't know, it was almost, well, at that time, I'd have thought it probably was some witchcraft or some shit like that, but I don't know. Anyway, so the other thing though, and the reason why that I mentioned this about his daughters was Prophet used to like do these strange things. So one of his daughters was like my age. And again, I remember both their names, but I'm not going to say their names in case, just to protect their privacy. Uh, but one of them was my age, and one of them was like 2 years older than me. But this one particular one, the one that was my age, he it's just like the third time he's done this. Like this is gonna really sound ridiculous, y'all, but it's the truth. She was a shapely young lady, you know what I mean? Mature for her age, if you will, in terms of her, body composition or whatever. And so, but Prophet, like she would walk by and he'd be, how you be doing, doing your salutation. Hey, how you doing? What's going on, Chris? How you doing, man? I ain't seen you in a long time, whatever. And then so this his daughter would walk by, and I never forget, he grabbed her by the ass and squeezed it and said, "Look, Chris, my daughter got a fat ass, don't she? Fat, juicy ass." And I just remember thinking to myself, like, first of all, I'm embarrassed as hell for his daughter, right? And I'm just a shorty, but I'm embarrassed as hell looking at her, you know, and the wild thing about it is, as much as I was embarrassed for her, like I had no idea, like the depths of what her embarrassment probably was because I had just never seen nothing like that. And you understand something about me, like I guess the way I grew up, I had a certain ideal about things, about the way things went in life and stuff like that. And I had a few TV references, but that was about it. So, but I never was one to really sit there and examine a whole lot of stuff in real time, kind of like I do now. But back then, I just kind of rolled with it, you know. But I remember being embarrassed for his daughters, and I remember thinking to myself, this dude is wild. Uh, but again, thinking about my sister, she must have been mortified, you know. But anyway, so I remember at least two, if not three occasions where I was over his house and, he would do the same thing, grab his daughters by the ass. Well, one particular daughter, he would grab her by the ass and talk about her fat, juicy ass. And but she wasn't there that day. She wasn't there that day. And, I hadn't seen them, probably in a couple years. So anyway, back to this summer evening. We in the St. Louis Central West End, which is had, kind of had a really super cool urban vibe to it, back in the day, you know, wish I knew how to describe the area, but it was like right in Midtown St. Louis, so it's really in St. Louis City. It's really the north side of the city, really. But because of gentrification, because of racism, yada, 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 they decided to call it the Central West End. Anyway, Google it yourself. But back in the day, it was a really happening spot. They used to have some really great restaurants there, had a bunch of nice little clubs, little bars and stuff. So it was really happening, it's particularly in the 80s. In the mid 80s, I used to work there at this place called Herschel's Deli and Bakery. And it was like a 24-hour spot. They made all their own pastries and stuff. Like it was a dope ass place. Anyway, yeah, I digress. But anyway, so he drops me off, and I'm there with the prophet. And so we sitting there watching TV. Now all the lights are off. It's like early evening, kind of twilight, and the lights was off except for like the sunlight coming through the windows and the television. And we sitting there watching Family Feud. So I was in there watching Family Feud, and it's the old school Family Feud. It ain't Steve Harvey. It's for you youngsters out there, it's Richard Dawson. So you'd have to look Richard Dawson up if you don't know who he was. But but he was the host, and one of the things that he used to do all the time was kiss the women on the lips, on the lips. So like I know what you're thinking. Like if you a millennial person, you thinking he did what? Yes. He would go up to the contestants and be like, he before he asked him the question, he go over there, kiss him, and then he asks him 100 people surveyed, what is the blah 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 blah, So, but that was the time. Like that was the times we were living in. And trust me, he wasn't the only one. A lot of these game show hosts was kind of freaky deaky. Bob Barker had his time. You could look that up. He was doing more than the Showcase Showdown, if you know what I'm saying, with some of Southern California's finest. But it was that time in television where much of it really leaned into chauvinism, a boys will be boys type of atmosphere. And, if you think women had it tough, if you think they got it tough now, shit, then, my God. But anyway, but he would kiss these women on the lips. And although that would not work today, I don't think that would work today. I don't know. Maybe Wayne Brady should try it. I don't know. But anyway, me and the prophet, we sitting on the couch and it was kind of quiet, you know what I'm saying? And we watching the show and I'm kind of wanting to break the monotony a little bit. So I said, I remember when Richard Dawson was about to kiss this man on the show and he stopped himself. So, like, he was so used to going through the women and stuff. So, he got up to this guy, this woman's husband, whatever, and he was like, oh, and everybody started laughing. So that's what I said. I said, yeah, I remember I started laughing, I mean, imitating Dawson's head snapping back, when he realized who he thought was Betty was really like Bob. So Prophet turns around and looks at me and says, well, what's wrong with that? So I'm thinking again, I'm young, and I'm thinking he asking me like technically what was wrong. Now, mind you, I don't know what a homosexual is at this point. Okay. I don't know what homosexuality is, lesbianism. I don't know any of that stuff at this point in my life. And so I hit him with cuz that's a man. You don't be kissing no man in the mouth, you know? So, and again, I'm still thinking it's a pretty innocent conversation. That's what grooming is all about, though, right? Anyway, so it was at this point that old buddy felt that it was time for him to give me a lesson on it. So he gives me this basis on how a man can love another man the same way, that a man can love a woman, this kind of thing. Um, and again, at that time, it's like the first time I'm really hearing an explanation on this. So, I was a TV head growing up, and I remember I used to watch soap. Do 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 do. I'm sorry, the theme song just came to my mind. Anyway, uh, there was a character named Peter. I think he was played by Billy Crystal. So there was a character named Peter that was gay on soap. But I didn't know what gay meant. You know what I'm saying? Like, if anything, I thought based on Peter's character that a gay person was just kind of small and soft, frail. Uh, I didn't think anything had having to do anything with sex. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I wasn't even going around like at that point, I'm not a very sexual being or anything like that. You know what I'm saying? So I'm still learning my own self and what girls are like and stuff like that, all curious and stuff. So I didn't equate gayness to sex, you know, at all, or it having anything to do with sex or sexual preference, any of that stuff. I just okay, gay, you know. And then I also remember that it was a movie back then, maybe 78, 79, something like that. And it was called Cruising. It was an Al Pacino movie. And I remember the highlights, like it was just like this, what I remember about it. Maybe I'm wrong because memories can throw you off and it, be a long, long time trying to put things together. But I remember it was like the highlights were like this dark and wet New York City streets, the way it was shot. And I remember it was controversial, but then I thought it was just because different dudes is getting together doing wild shit, but nothing really specific. Maybe doing drugs, being deviant, wearing their black leather and stuff like that, but nothing really super specific, you know? So so then my guy, so then the prophet, again, he goes on to explain, more and more and more and more and more. And it starts to get a little bit more uncomfortable as he asks me, have you ever heard of anal sex? Now, yes, that's what I just said. Yes, he asked me, have you ever heard of anal sex? Okay, so again, I don't know too much about heterosex at this point. Damn sure didn't know what he was talking about. I didn't know what an anal was, an anus. You know what I'm saying? But but he felt like it was his he felt it was his what's what's the name of that song? Use Me. He felt it was his appointed duty to explain to me what my anus is, and then get to explaining how a man is penetrating the anus the same way he does a vagina. And I'm like, oh, like, what's this say? Like, are you kidding me? Uh, but okay, so but I'm not all the way out there yet in terms of me feeling any type of fearful. I wasn't there yet. I was just kind of like, hmm. And I did think to myself, well, that sounds painful, right? And even though again, like you get all these mixed messages, so I don't really know like all the, you know, nuanced little details and stuff about all this. But, I'm like, it just seemed nasty to me. You know what I'm saying? Even for me, I'm thinking probably not age appropriate. But so at this point, I got nothing to say. I'm kind of like silence. I'm like silence, I say. And then this is what threw me. So this is what threw me after that. And he looks at my silence, I guess, gets closer to me, puts his arm around me, and starts laughing and said, you're gonna be all right, Chris. You're gonna be all right. Now the proverbial crap hits the fan. I say crap because some people don't want me to. Some people have encouraged me not to use so much profanity on these things. And I can't promise you, I'm gonna just try to do a little bit better. You know what I mean? Because I don't want to use profanity to be gratuitous, but you know, sometimes you just got to place a motherfucker where a motherfucker need to go. You know what I'm saying? So in this case, I was scared like a motherfucker. You know what I'm saying? And I remember like I just kind of froze, and all of a sudden the TV is just like part of the atmosphere. Like I don't know what these questions are that Richard Dawson is asking, because again, kind of growing up, I watched a lot of TV, I watched a lot of game shows. I enjoyed game shows. I used to like guess and answers and stuff like that. But now like I'm just zoned out on everything. And so then I figure, okay, now I'm scared. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm straight scared. This older man, probably stronger than me, this, that, and the other. And he kind of got me cornered. And from my recollection, I think I just sat there, like totally still, and I waited for him to go to the bathroom or get up or do something. So eventually he got up. And when he did, I got up and I went outside. So I went outside, uh, I left, I walked around the apartment complex. Uh, I probably walked around the Central West End, like right down Lindell Avenue and shit, probably Del Mar, like, like I was just walking until my father got back. And when I saw my father's car back, that's when I came back in. So, nothing was talked about. And me and my dad left. So when we left, I told him about what his man's did. Told him about the whole, family feud, anal sex, you know, explaining all this shit to me and putting his arm around me. And I remember my father's expression was like I could tell he was angry. I could tell he was angry. Uh, because he kind of bit his lip, you know what I'm saying? You could just tell like he didn't want to reveal too much, but he wasn't a happy camper. But nevertheless, I didn't hear anything else about it. I didn't hear nothing else about it. So, on that note, we're going to take a break and we're going to talk about our sponsor before we wrap this up. Queso. What? So, as you know, I just want to give you a brief description here about how they get down. At Queso What? It redefines the art of the quesadilla with a gourmet twist that tantalizes your taste buds. Their made-to-order creations blend a diverse array of cuisine, from the rich flavors of soul food and the zest of Tex-Mex to the freshness of seafood and the heartiness of vegan options. Each quesadilla is a masterpiece, crafted with the finest ingredients and a passion for culinary innovations, ensuring a dining experience that is both unique and unforgettable. What truly sets them apart is our commitment to a variety and quality. Whether you include a savory breakfast quesadilla, a juicy chicken creation, or a plant-based delight, their menu caters to every palate. As a small kiosk, food truck, and catering service, they can bring your gourmet quesadillas to you, offering a convenient and delicious option for any occasion. Okay, so what? We don't just serve food. We serve an experience that celebrates the fusion of flavors and the joy of eating. Well, that don't sound good. I don't know what to tell you, but they're located at 3242 Rue Royale Street, Suite 1, St. Charles, Missouri 63301. And if you want to call and get the 411, find out, hey, what's on the menu today? What's on the menu today? Like on Fridays, there's the queso C. It's my favorite. I'll talk about that. Along with that, the queso oxtail, the queso Caribbean. That might be on Mondays. I don't know. We have to find out. But anyway, you can find out before I even find out. Just call. Just call Shantae Young and ask her at 314-341-7734, and you can get the scoop on what's going on for that day. They are closed on Wednesdays and Sundays, but open every day otherwise. And there is like a 2 hour break between 2 and 4 for restocking and cleaning that thing. So get on them quesos, them gourmet quesos. They are the best. Uh, and we're very proud to be partnering with them. Okay, now back to wrap this story up. So, to put this in a little bit of a bow, I never heard from Old Prophet again. Okay, until 1998, the fall of 1998. Well, the fall of 1998 was when my father passed. My father died on October 26th, 1998. And, we buried him. And during that time, between getting his arrangements together and everything and trying to get his affairs in order, uh, I get a call. Uh, I get a call that the prophet wants to talk to me. And the reason uh, he wanted to talk to me was because a lot of my father's things was at his house. So apparently in 1998, in the fall, my father was staying with him. Now, my father was a Rolling Stone anyway. Okay. And when I say that, I mean he wasn't very good with money. He was always a salesperson. And I remember growing up, like there would be times where he was really rolling in the dough. Nice car, nice townhouse, apartment, whatever. Like I remember he was staying in places like St. Louis Cardinal. He had St. Louis Cardinal baseball players as as neighbors. You know, he was always proud of that type of shit too. But so, but then, the flip side of that too, man, was he might be staying with somebody. You know what I mean? Like, he might be in the car. You know what I mean? He stayed in his car. Like it would just be, he would be on that, that up and down life. It was feast or famine with him. It was never in between. And he was also notorious for disappearing for long periods of time. You wouldn't hear from him. You know, it could be months until he was ready to make himself seen. And one thing I like to tell my close friends, my guy friends, because they know about this life is, my favorite sport. One of my favorite sports is probably my favorite sport now, but one of my favorite sports even growing up was boxing. So, whenever there was a nice boxing match, my daddy always figure out a way to get in touch with me. So he could see where I'm watching the fight. Am I going somewhere? Or am I gonna get it at the crib? Either way, he knew if it was a big time fight going on, Marvin Hagler, Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran, whoever, right? Mike Tyson, in his day, Vander Holyfield, Lennox Lewis. He knew I was gonna have that damn fight. He knows some kind of way I was gonna be watching that fight. So he'd be like, "Yeah, hey son, yeah, man, where you watching the fight at, man?" Yeah, all right, daddy, I'm gonna be watching over here, come on through, whatever, or come by and you can ride with me, whatever. So anyway, my dad was married at the time, but him and his wife was kind of separated on the ons and offs and stuff. And before he had his surgery, which kind of the side effects of the surgery eventually led to his demise. But when he had the surgery, him and his wife was talking again and she was visiting the hospital and stuff like that. But they weren't like living together. So apparently his stuff was over, you know, this guy's house. So he had been calling me, wanted to know what I wanted to do with his clothes, this, that, and the other. And because I hadn't heard from this guy since like again I was 11, somewhere between 11 and 13. All I heard was, he's like explaining, well, Chris, your father's things over here, blah. All I heard was blah 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 blah. Cause all I could think of was that evening and how this punk predator nasty ass motherfucker tried to put the moves on me as a fucking child. And then I thought about his daughter, so like, and how he treated them, and you know, and I'm like, but I hadn't thought about those things, in years, man, in decades. All of a sudden, all this shit comes running back to me, and it's like now I'm already grieving my father. You know what I mean? I gotta bury this dude. I'm dealing with unresolved issues, shit we ain't got to talk about. First time losing a parent. You know what I'm saying? All of that. Now I got to deal with this motherfucker. And I just remember like the two or three times I talked to him, I would always be super short with you know, like what you want, you know what I'm saying? Like I just remember like giving him the business. Like, and people who know me know that I ain't really that kind of person. I talk to people most of the time with respect. If they talk to me with respect, even if I don't agree with them, even if we ain't really G'ing or getting along, you know what I'm saying? It's time and place for everything, so in a normal situation, even if I ain't like this dude, which I didn't, I wouldn't have felt it unreasonable to deal with him to get my father's things. But hearing his voice just took me there. And so he kept saying to me shit like, well, Chris, I don't understand why you talking to me this way. Because like I said, everything was short, you know, wasn't no, hey, how you doing? Prophet, you know what I'm saying? I almost said his name, but I don't want to say his name. So, and I definitely wasn't gonna call him no damn prophet, you know what I'm saying? But just hearing his voice, it just everything flushed back to me. And I just had disdain, all I had was disdain and contempt, you know. And like I said, he had the nerve to ask me why I was talking crazy to him, and I'm like saying to myself, motherfucker, you know exactly why I'm talking to you like this. And if you don't, that's even worse. So, that's all I have to say about that. That's my story. That's the time this raggedy ass old black man tried to groom a young black brother who he should have been looking after as a friend of my father's. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, so was your dad and the prophet, and the truth of the matter is, man, hell, I don't know. I don't know. And the thing is, I don't even give a damn. You know what I'm saying? I really don't give a damn. I do know that my father was thought of himself as a ladies' man for sure. I met plenty of his girlfriends and wives. uh, but for me, I really just don't give a damn. You know what I'm saying? Because it ain't even important, you know, as far as I'm concerned. What is important is that there are people out here, who will try to take advantage of your kids. So you got to be careful. And, if that's ever happened to you or something like it, as far as I'm concerned, I consider myself blessed because I got out of there. You know what I'm saying? I got out of there. If he had went to grabbing me and shit, I don't really know what would happen. They say you go the flight or fight. Obviously, when I had my opportunity to move, I moved. I got the fuck up out of Dodge. So, that was a good thing. I consider myself to be very blessed. And still, I feel a sense of emotional trauma. Now, it's funny because I told this story to my cousin, Omar, a week or so ago. And I got a little emotional talking about it then, but I don't feel that way now. I think talk about a couple, once or twice, it kind of took the steam off of it some. So now it's really just more of a principle thing to me. But, if this ever happened to you, or if you weren't so lucky to get out, whatever the case may be, man, don't be afraid to talk to somebody about it. Obviously talk to somebody you could trust, whether it's a therapist or, trusted family friend or whoever, man. But, uh, it's okay to talk about it because just like it came back to me, in a visceral kind of way, it could come back to you, and you just never know what kind of unresolved issues you may have um, from having to deal with something like this. I've said it before, and I gave the statistics on how, many women have been, sexually assaulted, raped, um, and had all kind of crappy things happen to them, growing up in this patriarchal, male-dominated toxic masculinity type of society we have. But you can't sleep on the amount of brothers and men, young men who have been taken advantage of, who've been, you know, dogged out by somebody they trusted. Hell, you could watch the this documentary on Max called Surviving Ohio State. And it talks about this guy, this doctor, uh, I mean, man, he was like a demon walking around that campus. You know what I'm saying? You can get a concussion. You can have a concussion, be like, oh, doc, my head, I think my head felt like it split open. And this first thing this doctor do, oh yeah, your head's fucked up, huh? I'll tell you what, come over here and drop your drawers. I need to examine your nuts. Like this is what was happening. Okay. So, and this again was somebody they trusted. This wrestlers and stuff and athletes and football players, tough guys, who are still young and impressionable and want to be in this position to, make the football team. Some of these people, like one guy, I think he said he had Hell, it was 18,000 people or something like that in his community. But he goes to Ohio State and there's double that just in the college on the campus. You know what I mean? So, and then you had motherfuckers like Jim Jordan. Yes, that Jim Jordan, uh, who knew what was going on and was covering it up. Still lying about it to this day. So men are not exempt. Men are not exempt. Boys are not exempt. Uh, whether it's being, taken advantage of or attempts taken advantage of by a woman or by another male, against a male who you trust, who, you feel like should have some level of respect about himself, you know. So anyway, that's all I got on that, man. Thanks for listening to my story. If you don't mind, like, subscribe, comment, let me know how you feel about the episode. And I thank you for listening to me and taking this time. Let's see. We'll be back again with another episode. Got some more good projects we're working on. Still trying to line up some interviews as well. So we're out here working hard for you to get you some good and useful content. In the meantime, stay safe. Peace.